Ryan Thomas with EastWest here, and I am super excited about this video. I think this is going to be a fun one. I've been really excited about it ever since we sort of got it in development. So really what this is just kind of a big picture exploration of ComposerCloud Plus and how you can use all of these really powerful elements in the context of an entire piece. So we're also going to be discussing hybrid composing, which we get a lot of questions on. We know that for some of you, it's very intimidating. So we're just gonna break down this piece and hopefully demystify hybrid composing for you. So let's go ahead and start right up at the top with the strings. And it's really simple stuff here. I'm using the tremolo articulation in these first violins. And notably, I'm using Hollywood Strings 2 for these. They just kind of fit the vibe for this section. And you'll notice throughout this piece that I'm using a combination of Hollywood Strings 2, Hollywood Strings 1, even Hollywood Fantasy Strings, just kind of depending on what fit the vibe for that section the best, and really what fit into the mix the best for that part. So here's those strings at the beginning. That's the general sound. And let's go ahead and skip to 11. Super simple stuff. And I'll note that I'm using Hollywood Strings 2 for the legato violas and Hollywood Strings 1 for the cello. That was just a really nice combination. Okay, let's go ahead and hear what's going on in the brass. We do have this French horn solo. Such a gorgeous instrument, so beautifully recorded and programmed. It's just so playable and inspiring. Okay, and now for kind of the meat of this section, which is going to be the synth content. We've even got some trailer piano in here. And this is just a piano that I made from the Steinway D in EastWest Pianos. You can see I've got a bit of a filter on it. We've got some reverb here, but it's not super processed. So let's go ahead and just hear the trailer piano by itself. It's got just the perfect vibe for this. And then we have this pad, and we've just got some really simple parts here. And I should point out that this is actually a combo patch. And I made this using the ethereal patch from the Dark Side, and then a couple patches from Forbidden Planet. And let me tell you, the OPUS engine is just so incredibly powerful. It gives you all these different tools to mold and shape the sound, and there's really not much that you can't do. So as you can see, there's no dry signal coming through here. It's all 100% wet, and I'm using that Planetary 7 reverb. So let's actually hear this pad on its own. So if you want to recreate this, these are all the patches. And again, I'm just passing this through the Planetary 7 reverb in OPUS. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the lead that is in this intro. And I'm just using the blinding lead in Iconic. Iconic is such a versatile instrument. It's great for pop production, it's great for retro productions, and it's also got some really solid cinematic patches. The huge lead, again, is a patch combo. So this is using the Godzilla lead 4 and then just the Godzilla from Forbidden Planet, and that sounds like this. So that's a really fun patch. And then finally we've got this is actually a pad from Iconic, and I've got a tremolo on it, so that sounds like this. Now, besides that, you do have some sound design elements that I've created. More on that in future videos, but for now, let's go ahead and just hear this entire intro. right, this next section gets really fun. We're introducing the acoustic drum kit. You've got all these fun ostinatos in the strings and just lots of orchestral craziness. But let's go ahead and hear what the strings are doing first. All right, and then in the second half of this phrase, we are bringing in the brass section. So let's go ahead and solo brass. So you've got the French horns kind of on that melody there with the trombones and tuba supporting that chord. All right, and then in the woodwinds, they're mostly just doubling the strings here. You can see they are playing those ostinato lines with the strings, and I'm using Hollywood Orchestrator for that. It's a super quick way to write these parts, and it sounds great. And then you do have flute 1 and flute 2 doubling the violin line here at 19. Then we have the acoustic drum kit, and I'm using this really nice kit from EastWest Pro Drummer. This is the Spike Stent Hybrid Kit 1. It just sounds so good. And besides that, you have this little line in the Fairy Pool. This is actually an ARP synth from Iconic. So if you play those single notes, you're just going to get octaves. And it just kind of fit really well here. It had that video game vibe. And then besides that, you have the mini lead 2 saw plus trumpet. This is just a patch that I made from Iconic, and that sounds like this. And if you'll notice, that's really just doubling the cello ostinato line. So we're using synth here to kind of reinforce some of those orchestral elements. So let's go ahead and hear everything together. I'm going to pull up this drum kit. Again, this is just such a nice kit from EastWest Pro Drummer. All right, and then we introduce some really fun elements in this part. We are bringing in another iteration of the Fairy Pool synth, but I've done a few things to the mix. So I've added a bit crusher, and that sounds like this. So you're just kind of getting that fun 8-bit video game sound. And I should point out that I have disabled the arpeggiator on this particular patch. Then we have the bubble bath pad coming in. And this also has a tremolo applied, so it sounds like this. I'm going to play it with the Fairy Pool. So lots of fun stuff there. And then we have that same Iconic patch from before playing this bass line that originally I had an electric bass playing, but I tried it out with this synth and it just really fit. So let's go ahead and hear all the hybrid elements by themselves. All right, so we're kind of working our way backwards here. You do also notably have these bongos in, this is from Storm Drum 2. Just such a beautiful movie sound. These bongos are perfect for this kind of thing. And then we're going to go ahead and solo what the woodwinds are doing because you do have some fairly delicate parts here. And in the brass, we don't have much going on here. The brass is just joining the rest of the orchestra here at 29. So let's go ahead and skip over to the strings. So let's go ahead and hear everything together. And then this next section is where things get really magical. We bring in more of these legato lines. So let's start here in the strings. And I'm going to pull up the venerable first violin's legato slur from Hollywood Strings. And I should point out that I'm using the low strings from Hollywood Fantasy Strings in this section. They just sound so good, especially in parts like this where you need this really big, expansive sound. So let's go ahead and hear the brass. All right, and moving on to the woodwinds, we have these runs going up to these trills, and the woodwinds are just kind of going crazy here. So let's go ahead and hear what's going on. So we were just kind of having fun with the woodwinds in this part. Now you've also got some harp. You've got the crashes. These are from Hollywood Orchestral Percussion. They sound great. Nice and clear. You've got some mark tree, kind of giving us some sparkle and shimmer in the background. And then in the hybrid elements, you've got some patches that we've already heard. You've got the same bass patch that is reinforcing those string basses. And you've got the pluck lead from the intro, but we are bringing in a new patch. This is the checkpoint reached pad from Iconic, and I've got a tremolo on that as well, so that you're kind of getting this nice pulsing effect. So again, you have the synths that are reinforcing what's going on in the orchestra. This pluck lead is playing the same melody as the trumpets and the violins. So it's just kind of adding some interesting texture. And of course, you have this bass synth that again is reinforcing those string basses. That's a very common technique, and you can get a really solid result that way. So let's go ahead and hear everything together. All right, and then in this last big section, this is where we're kind of pulling out all the stops. We're adding another synth patch here that is, again, kind of supposed to give you that video game sound. That's just such a cool sound. I think I just kind of made this one from some of the elements in Iconic. And then you have the drum kit that's just going crazy. Those toms just sound so clean and punchy. And then in the woodwinds, you do have a bit of a break here. You know, when I write orchestral parts, even when I'm using 100% virtual instruments, I still like to write things somewhat realistically. So after this big passage here, you'd probably want to give your woodwind players a little bit of a break. So that's why you have this break here at measure 40. And then the woodwinds come back in at measure 42, and they're joining the strings on these runs. So let's go ahead and hear the woodwinds by themselves. All right, now let's move on to the brass. And man, there's just so much power in these patches. Hollywood brass, Hollywood fantasy brass, just have such a huge range of dynamics. I mean, just perfect for this kind of a piece. All right, and then let's go ahead and hear the strings. We're gonna solo them, and I'm gonna pull up the first violin's key switch patch so that you can see some of the key switching that is going on here. All right, now let's go ahead and see how this is all fitting together. So hopefully you've been able to get a sense of just how powerful ComposerCloud Plus is. It's truly expansive, and there's really not much that you can't do with it. And remember, we've really just been skimming the surface. There is so much more content here. You've got every instrument group, every genre represented in ComposerCloud Plus, and everything is just done so incredibly well. So of course, you can find ComposerCloud Plus on our website, and I really hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to like it, drop a comment, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any future content. That's all for now. Thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.